Hey there, I'm Ken Calisher at Teletoon Studio. Today I'd like to talk to you about triads on the guitar and why they'd be useful to learn and how they work. Most people learn how to play chords from diagrams that tell you where to put your fingers to make a chord. There's nothing wrong with that method. It works perfectly well. The advantage of learning the elements of building triads is that you will be able to figure out your chord shapes on your own and how different chords relate to each other. I will also teach you about chord spelling. Other than learning to read music notation, chord spelling is the best way to learn the notes on your guitar. The way to learn notes is by trying to find them, and when you're chord spelling, you're constantly looking for a group of notes on your guitar neck. So as a result, you get to know the names of the notes much quicker. So what is a triad? A triad is a 3-note chord that is built from taking every second note from a scale. The most common triads are major and minor, and we'll mostly be dealing with those today. There's also diminished, augmented, and suspended triads. I won't go into great detail, but explain what they are. So let's start by looking at a C major scale, but we only need the first 5 notes. So we're going to play C, D, E, F, and G. So to make a scale, we take the first, which we call the root, the third, which is the third note, we call the third, and the fifth note of the scale. So those are our 3 elements that make up a triad. So if we look at the diagram, we have 3 separate inversions. So what is an inversion? Well, in the 3-note chord, there's 3 possible bass notes. So with each bass note, we get a different inversion. The first one being root position, C, E, G, and that's the strongest one. And the root is the name of the chord, so it's good to know that. The next one we have E, G, C, and that we call first inversion. That has a feeling like it wants to move. And it wants to move because the third is probably the least stable note of the triad. Then we have second inversion, which is G, C, E. That's the 5th is on the bottom. It also has a feeling of wanting to move, but not quite as strong because the 5th after the root is the second strongest interval, meaning a perfect 5th is a very strong interval. So it's important to note the root, 3rd, and 5th all have different qualities in the chord. The root being the strongest of the chord, the 5th being the next strongest, and the 3rd being the most colorful because it takes us from major to minor. Major, you lower the 3rd a semitone, you get a minor chord. So when you're studying traditional harmony, one of the rules when you're writing what we call voice leading is you really want to avoid doubling the 3rd. So the diagram, you'll notice, has 2 E's in it. If you take this E and make it a G, you will notice that it has a stronger sound. I'm not saying it's better. It's just good to be aware of the option. Also, by having movement, it can create some interest. A G chord also has 2/3. We have 2 B's. So by playing the D on the B string, I think that's stronger. Again, these aren't rules. None of these things in music are meant to be things you have to do. They're just things to be aware of, so you have more control over what sound you want. So if you take the 3rd out of a triad, you're left with a power chord. It's just two-note chord, and it's actually probably the strongest chord. It's used a lot in rock. So that's just a root and fifth. That's very simple to learn, very simple shape. If you take the C and move it up an octave, you get a perfect fourth. This is an inversion of a power chord, and it's less strong because now the fifth is on bottom. So it's not as strong, but it's strong enough. Smoke on the Water uses it. So that has a different quality. One's not better than the other. It's just good to know the difference. I'd say that it's easier to play because it's just barring. Here you have to move your fingers like that. So we have 3 inversions. So on each set of strings, we're going to take the A, D, and G string. That's our root position. So we can play the next ones. We can play up the neck like this. So this is our first inversion and our second inversion. We can do that on the next set of strings. Here's our C, but the first inversion. Then here's our C second inversion, where the root's in the middle, third's on top, fifth's on the bottom. It's just a bar chord. That's easy to learn. And this one is like a diagonal shape, C, E, G. That's our root position. So on these set of strings, your root position's there. And on the top string, we have G, C, and E. So that's our second inversion here. Our root position is C, E, G. And then we have E, G, and C. And then you can go up here and play. You see, like, you'll notice that just looks like a D position. But you'll notice that this finger's on a C. Here it's disguised because it's the same shape, but we have open strings. So it looks different. So it's important here to note that it's not only the shapes of the chords that are important to know, which note's the root, which one's the third, and which one's the fifth. The root's important because that's the name of the chord that you're playing. If you want to know the name of the chord, you have to know the root. The third's important because that defines whether it's major or minor. And also the fifth's important to know because some chords you need to know which one's the fifth when you're altering it. So if you know your major shape, so let's take a C major chord. That's root position. So the root's on the bottom, third's in the middle. So if we want to make that minor, we just lower that. There's our minor shape. So a minor shape is like major. So the next inversion for C is it's a first inversion. So the third's on the bottom, the fifth's in the middle, the root's on top. So this is a C chord because that's the name of the chord. To make it C minor, we lower the lower note. Because that's the third, we get a C. So a C minor here is just a bar chord, just like E minor is just open strings. A minor, you just have to know which one is the root. That's why it's important. We have a C major way up here. It looks like a D shape, and just like D to D minor, the third's on top. The C major, you lower the top note and you get C minor. So those are your minor shapes. And that's it. You've learnt your minor chords. To make a major chord into a diminished chord, you have to alter 2 notes, the third and the fifth. They both get lowered a semitone. So here's our C major. If you lower these 2, C major, now the root's on top, C major. Now the root in this one's in the middle. So you'll notice in diminished we have 3 shapes for diminished too. For an augmented chord, you raise the 5th. Now the interesting about augmented is it's what we call a symmetrical chord, meaning all the shapes are identical. They're built on major third. So you'll notice even though this major looks, when I raise the 5th, I get the same shape I had here. And same here, we have C. When I raise the lower note, the 5th, I get the same shape. So there's only one shape for augmented on each group of strings. Diminished is also a symmetrical chord. It's built on minor thirds, but with the diminished, since we're missing one note because you get 4 different notes within an octave. So a diminished chord is usually a diminished 7th chord. So we're missing that one note. That's why we have 3 shapes for diminished. Since augmented chords are symmetrical chords, that is a way for you to know on any set of strings from an augmented chord all your major and all your minor shapes, which there's 3. So you're learning 6 shapes from altering one shape. So let me explain. Here's a C augmented. Any note I raise, that note becomes the root of a minor chord. So if I raise this G sharp to an A, I have an A minor chord. If I raise the E to an F, I have an F minor chord. So there's my F minor. So not only do you know the shape, but you know where the root is. So if I raise a C to a C sharp, I get a C sharp minor. So conversely, any note you lower on an augmented chord, that becomes the 5th of a major chord. So the top note, G sharp, if I lower that, that brings us to the C because the G is the 5th of the C. But there's your shape for C. If I lower the middle note, if I lower the E to an E flat, that becomes the 5th of an A flat major chord. So there's your A flat, and there's your other shape. And if I lower the lowest note, if I lower the C to a B, then I get a E major. So just from the augmented chord, there's all those chords. That's a really handy trick. And it's a good exercise to do. You can do it even though you don't even need the guitar to do it. You can just do it in your head. Now we go on to sus chords. Sus chords are different because we're not root 3rd and 5th anymore. In a sus chord, you take the 3rd and you move it to the 4th. So if we have this C chord, we take the E and we raise it and we get a sus. So that's why we have to know where the 3rd is, or we don't know what note to raise. So in this case, the 3rd's on the bottom, so here's our sus. And here, the 3rd's on top. You'd recognize this from your D shape. You'll also probably recognize this sound. That's a sus 2. That's when you take the 3rd and you lower it by a full tone. It's a scale tone, so it's the 2nd note. That's why we call a D sus 2. When it's just a sus, you expect it to be the 4th, but you have sus 2s. So sus 2, so you can always figure out a chord. That's the great thing about learning this method. You don't have to go get your chord book. So now let's talk about moving from one chord to the next chord. In harmony, we call that voice leading. And when you study harmony, voice leading is the art of moving from one chord where all the individual voices of that chord move smoothly and are singable. That's an important point because it was originally written for choir, so you're not having people sing uncomfortable jumps, because if you write things that are hard to sing, your composition won't sound very good. So voice leading was very important in writing. First rule in voice leading I'd like to talk about is if you have two chords and they share the same note. For instance, if I'm going from C to a G, C has C, E, G, and G has a G, B, D. So both of those chords have a G in it. So the nice voice leading for that would be the G's up here. So I want to keep that on the top when I go to the G. C, E, G. And then I go to the G chord. That G doesn't have to move. If I'm going from C to F, C is C, E, G, and F is F, A, C. So F has a C, so this C in the C chord, we want to keep and make the F, so the E would move up to an F, which is a semitone, and the G would move up to an A. So that's a nice smooth transition. And that's the same up here. If I'm going from C here, if I won't go to F and G. So the G is the middle note, I keep it here. The C is the top note, so I keep it on the F. C, G. So up here, we have the C, and the G's on the bottom, so we go to a G root position. And the F, the C's in the middle, we want to keep that. So another rule to pay attention to, if you have all the notes that are different, you usually want it to go in the opposite direction of the bass. Because another thing we avoid in voice leading is all the voices going in the same direction. It sounds nice to have some contrary motion. It's just nice on the ears. So when you're going from an F to a G, you could go up. But the bass player is also doing that, so if you go down, you're going to be going down where the bass player goes up. So many people studying music and theory use something called the cycle of fifths. The cycle of fifths is a circle going through all the chords or all the notes in fifths, meaning if we start on a C and put it at the top, the C is the fifth of an F, meaning on an F scale, the C is the fifth note. So it resolves to an F. An F will resolve to B flat, then B flat to E flat to A flat to D flat. D flat would go to a G flat or an F sharp. F sharp would resolve to a B, B to an E, E to an A to a D, D to a G, then we're back at C. So we've gone through all 12 keys, so it's a great way of practicing things. It's also the way that things like to cycle. So it's a great way to practice. And it's excellent for us to practice our triads. So if we start with a C, we always do the same movement from chord to chord when we go through a cycle. So when we start on a C, we have a C in an F chord. We're going from C to F. So we keep the C. The third is a E, and that goes up a semitone to the F. The fifth is a G, and that goes up a tone to an A. So we get an F chord. F wants to go to a B flat, and F is already in the B flat, so we keep the F. The third is an A, and that goes up a semitone to the new root, B flat. The C goes up a tone to the D, and then we have a B flat root position, root, third, and fifth. So from a B flat, we want to go to an E flat. The B flat's in an E flat, so we keep that. The third goes up a semitone to an E flat, and the fifth goes up a tone, so we get an E flat chord. From the E flat, we want to resolve to an A flat. So all the same things keep on going on. So we'll get an A flat. From A flat, we get a D flat. From D flat, we get a G flat. And you'll notice there's only 3 shapes, and they keep repeating in the same order. So we're back at C there. Went up the full octave. The other thing is, if you notice, if you look on the cycle, you will see that any 3 notes beside each other, the center note will be the root, and the note on the right will be the fifth, and the note on the left will be the fourth. Anytime you play the 1, 4, 5 with this type of voice leading, you will have all 3 types of inversions. So if we're in the key of G, we'd have a G, up to a C, down to a G, and then a D. And the idea of the voice leading is that you always have the smooth transitions. So far in this video, we've only been talking about closed voicings, and they're what you'll use most of the time anyway. They're more common. But if you want to sound a little different, a little bit like a mandolin or violin or cello, they play in open voicings. And what an open voicing is, a closed voicing is actually playing root, third, fifth, all in order, the closest ones. To make it open, you take the middle note and put it up an octave. So you skip that, you get root, then the fifth, then the third. Now this is going to be hard to strum. Even it might be easier to play with your fingers because you're going to be skipping strings, because it's a little challenging that way. If I want to go to the F chord, the same rules that I was using in closed position applies. The root stays the same, the third goes up a semitone, and the fifth goes to go to the fifth. Now we're kind of going backwards. Now the root goes down a semitone. The G stays the same because we want the G, and the E goes down a tone. So we get as you can see, this is a more advanced thing, but it's important to talk about because all things about music is knowing your options and knowing if you have a sound in your head, then you'll have a better idea of how to get that sound by studying these different things. That's all it is. It's just a different way of playing the same thing. So if we I was playing that with open strings. To play that in a closed position, the root position would be so then if we go to this position, so we have in first position we have E, but we want to skip the C and we have a G, so we could play it like this. Or you might decide to play the G here. So that's your those are your two shapes for your first inversion. Second inversion, in this inversion we have G on the bottom, we skip the C, and we play an E, and then we play the C up an octave. So those are open chords. And of course, you can play those also in a cycle. So you can see, going through the process of learning triads, it will really help you get to know your fingerboard and your guitar better, and how chords are put together. So I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching. I'm Ken Kalisher at Teletoon Studio.